There is a woman every man should fear. She is not defined by beauty, nor by wealth, nor even by status. Her power lies in something far more dangerous, her ability to shape the soul of a man without him realizing it. Confucius, the great sage of China, warned that the destruction of men does not always come through war or poverty or violence. It comes through the subtle influence of the wrong kind of woman. A woman who can twist virtue into weakness, who can feed desire until it rots into dependence, who can make a man abandon his path of greatness for the shallow comfort of her approval. This truth is uncomfortable, almost forbidden, because to admit it forces us to face how fragile men really are when confronted with temptation, manipulation, and misplaced loyalty. A man may believe himself strong, but one wrong woman in his life can undo decades of discipline. Confucius was not interested in romantic fantasies. He was interested in power, moral power, spiritual power, the kind of strength that can guide empires. And he knew that the downfall of men often begins not with external enemies, but with the person he lets closest to his heart. So today we ask the question most men are too afraid to face. Who is this woman Confucius feared? And why, if you do not learn to recognize her, will she strip you of everything you are? Confucius lived in a world of collapse. China, during his lifetime, was fractured by warring states, treachery, and chaos. Kings murdered their brothers for power. Fathers abandoned their duties, sons betrayed their families. In this world of disorder, Confucius became obsessed with a single question. How do we restore harmony in a society where everyone is ruled by selfish desire? His answer was not political, not military, but psychological. Confucius believed that every collapse of nations begins first with the collapse of men, not in their bodies, not in their strength, but in their discipline. He believed that disorder begins when men fail to govern themselves, and the most dangerous accelerant to this collapse was a certain kind of woman, the kind who uses her charm to unseat a man's order, making him a slave to desire, impulse, and weakness. This is the woman every man should fear. Now, Confucius did not speak in the modern language of psychology or philosophy. He spoke in parables, aphorisms, and rituals. Yet beneath the ancient style lies a truth so raw that it disturbs us even today. He warned that the most dangerous threat to a man is not the warrior who carries a sword, but the seductress who bends his judgment. Why? Because a sword can cut your body, but desire can hollow out your soul. To understand this, we must step inside Confucius's vision of human nature. He believed every man has two sides, the cultivated self and the chaotic self. The cultivated self is disciplined, aligned with virtue, and capable of leading others. The chaotic self is impulsive, selfish, and easily swayed by temptation. A man who cannot master his chaotic self becomes a danger not only to himself but to society, because he will betray his duty when pleasure calls louder than principle. Here is where the woman enters the stage. For Confucius, the woman to fear was not simply a woman in the generic sense. It was the archetype of temptation itself, the figure who awakens the chaotic self, who makes a man betray the cultivated self. She is not always evil, not always intentional, but she represents the power of desire to undo discipline. She is the test that reveals whether a man is strong or merely pretending. Think about the implications of this. Confucius is telling us that men are most vulnerable not in war, not in politics, but in intimacy. That a man's strength is not truly tested when he holds a weapon, but when he is confronted by beauty, charm, and seduction. This is why history is filled with kings, generals, and emperors undone not by armies, but by women. Helen of Troy, Cleopatra, the countless concubines of emperors. Each story is not really about the woman herself, but about the man who lacked the inner discipline to resist. The downfall begins not with her, but with his weakness. Confucius crystallized this in a teaching that still shocks modern ears. Only the wise and the disciplined can resist the ruin that comes from women and servants. In other words, the two greatest threats to a man's stability were those beneath him. Not warriors above him, not rivals beside him, but those who could manipulate his desires and comforts from below. The psychology here is chillingly accurate, because most men are not conquered by enemies, they are conquered by their appetites. Desire is subtle. It does not strike like a sword. It whispers. It flatters. It feels good in the moment. And because it feels good, it blinds you. You lose sight of the long term for the comfort of the short term. You forget duty for the intoxication of pleasure. And when you wake up, it is too late. Confucius feared this more than war itself. To see this clearly, imagine two men. The first is poor but disciplined. He wakes before sunrise, honors his family, controls his temper, and studies relentlessly. He may have little power, but his life is ordered, and because it is ordered, it grows. The second man is wealthy, powerful, admired. But he is addicted to women, to comfort, to indulgence. His life looks grand, but his foundation is rotten. The first man in time will rise. The second, inevitably, will fall. Confucius's warning is not about women as enemies. It is about weakness as an enemy. The woman he says you should fear is not a literal woman you can point to. She is the mirror that exposes the truth of your character. She reveals whether you are ruled by principle or by impulse. This is why his teaching is so difficult to accept, because it forces every man to look at himself and ask, am I truly disciplined, or do I crumble the moment temptation arrives? Now let us go deeper. Confucius taught that the harmony of a household reflects the harmony of a nation. If the father is strong, the family is stable. If the family is stable, the nation can flourish. But if the father is weak, the family fractures, and the nation soon follows. The woman who unseats the man's discipline, therefore, is not just a personal danger. She becomes a political one. She can destabilize kingdoms by destabilizing the men who rule them. And history proved him right. Dynasty after dynasty fell because rulers lost themselves in lust, in indulgence, in the chaos awakened by women who knew how to wield influence. Again, not because the woman herself was inherently destructive, but because the man surrendered his cultivated self. This is the psychological brilliance of Confucius. He knew that temptation is not external. It only works if it finds a weakness inside you. If you are disciplined, temptation cannot touch you. But if you are weak, even the smallest charm will overthrow your entire order. So when Confucius said there is a woman every man should fear, what he was really saying is, there is a weakness inside you that will destroy everything if you do not master it. And that weakness will always disguise itself in beauty, in comfort, in pleasure. The question then is not, what kind of woman should I avoid? The real question is, what kind of man am I becoming? The one who is unshakable, or the one who crumbles? And that is the essence of Confucius's teaching. That strength is not measured by muscles, by money, or by status, but by whether you can stand firm when desire calls your name. That the greatest threat to your life is not out there in the world, but right here, in your inability to govern yourself. This is the truth men today still refuse to face. So what does this ancient teaching mean for you here, in a world of Instagram, Tinder, corporate grind, and fractured relationships? Why should the words of a sage who lived 25 centuries ago matter when you're trying to figure out why your girlfriend lost respect for you, why your boss talks down to you, or why you can't stop scrolling through distractions at 2 a.m.? Because the truth Confucius revealed about fear and respect hasn't changed. Civilization has evolved, technology has advanced, but human psychology is still wired by the same primal forces. And the woman every man should fear isn't just a figure outside of you. She's also a mirror of what you allow yourself to become. In today's world, men are trapped in a paradox. On one hand, society tells you to be soft, agreeable, endlessly tolerant, to embrace comfort at any cost. On the other, you're punished for being weak, ridiculed for being passive, discarded the moment you show that you cannot stand on your own. Women, society, even other men, they instinctively recoil from weakness. Not because they're cruel, but because weakness is dangerous. It signals that you cannot protect, cannot provide, cannot endure. This is where Confucius's insight becomes chillingly relevant. He warned of the destructive power of the petty, the small-minded, the emotionally unstable. And in the modern age, this archetype shows up everywhere, sometimes in a woman who tests your strength, sometimes in the soft, indulgent culture that tells you to hide from your own potential. Think about relationships first. How many men destroy themselves by failing to understand the dynamics of fear and respect? A woman does not consciously think, I will lose attraction if he's weak. But her body, her instincts, her unconscious cannot help but respond to the man who cannot stand firm. You felt this before, that sudden coldness in her tone, the withdrawal of warmth, the subtle testing questions. She does not want to submit to a man who cannot carry weight. And here's the paradox. She may not even want to be with the man who is dangerous, unpredictable, or merciless, but her body recognizes something primal. She fears his strength, and in that fear is also respect. This is not about cruelty. It's about polarity. The woman every man should fear is not simply an external figure who seeks to manipulate or control. It's the reality that when you lack power, you will naturally become controlled, whether by her, by society, or by your own unmastered desires. Now consider society. Confucius lived in a time when political corruption, social decay, and betrayal were everywhere. He saw firsthand how weak rulers destroyed entire kingdoms, how men without discipline brought chaos to their families, how flattery and indulgence rotted communities from within. Replace the kingdoms with corporations, the rulers with modern politicians, the flattery with social media validation. Nothing has changed. Weakness still invites exploitation. If you are timid, indecisive, or addicted to comfort, you are no different from the small man Confucius warned against. And just as women instinctively recoil from weakness, so does society. You become prey to stronger forces, whether it's the man who takes your promotion, the algorithm that hijacks your attention, or the manipulative person who feeds on your insecurity. Then there's personal growth. Every man today struggles with hidden chains: pornography, endless scrolling, overeating, addictions, fear of rejection, the inability to face silence without filling it with noise. These chains are modern forms of the same weakness Confucius condemned. And here's where his teaching grows sharper. The weakness itself is not what you should fear. It's the way weakness grows into resentment. A man who never confronts his flaws, who never disciplines himself, becomes bitter, envious, dangerous to himself and to others. He becomes the petty figure, unstable, toxic, destructive. And once again, this is the woman you must fear. Not simply female, but feminine in essence, the consuming, chaotic force that rises when strength is absent. Look at the patterns today. Why do so many relationships end in disaster? Why do women leave men they once claimed to love? It's not always because of betrayal or infidelity. Often it's because the man surrendered his strength. He stopped leading himself. He collapsed into passivity. And when that happens, attraction dies. Not because she chose to kill it, but because nature does. Confucius's warning comes alive here. The woman every man should fear is the one who will expose whether he has backbone or not. She will test, she will probe, she will withdraw warmth, not out of malice, but out of necessity. Because only through this testing does she discover whether he is real, whether he is someone she can trust, whether he is someone she can respect. If you fail the test, you're not just rejected. You are erased, invisible, no longer a man in her eyes. Now widen the frame. What about men in society at large? We live in an age where mediocrity is celebrated, where the average man is pacified by screens, entertainment, and shallow pleasures. Confucius would have called this the decline of virtue. And the woman to fear here is civilization itself when it becomes indulgent, when it rewards weakness and punishes strength. Think about it. The more passive you become, the more easily controlled you are. The more you crave comfort, the less you're able to endure suffering. And when suffering inevitably comes, through economic collapse, betrayal, illness, loss, you are crushed instantly. Confucius's ancient lesson strikes like a blade. Do not fear suffering. Fear becoming the man who cannot endure it. Do not fear women. Fear becoming the man who women cannot respect. Do not fear society. Fear becoming its victim, swallowed alive by your own softness. This is why his philosophy still cuts through centuries. Because the danger is not outside you. It's inside. The woman to fear is not only the partner who tests you or the social system that exploits you. It is your own smallness, your indulgence, your pettiness, your refusal to discipline your mind and your body. That is the feminine chaos that rises when the masculine principle of order collapses. And once you see this, you cannot unsee it. Every failed relationship, every wasted year, every quiet moment of shame is proof of it. You are either a man who stands firm, who can command fear and respect without cruelty, or you are a man who will be consumed by the very forces you failed to master. This is why Confucius matters today. His philosophy is not abstract. It is mercilessly practical, and if you ignore it, you will not simply lose respect, you will lose yourself. Confucius never wrote like a modern self-help guru. His wisdom wasn't a checklist of 10 things to do before sunrise. His lessons were sharper, more dangerous. They were meant to cut through illusions, to pierce pride, to burn weakness from a man's soul. If we strip them of their ceremonial language, we find commands, laws of survival and power that remain just as relevant in the modern world as they were in the courts and villages of ancient China. The first lesson is this: never place your trust in a woman who is not bound by virtue. Confucius believed that virtue was not optional. It was the center of life, the axis around which power, loyalty, and respect rotated. A woman without virtue, one who lives only for pleasure or vanity or status, becomes like a fire in dry grass. She will consume you not because she intends to, but because that is her nature. For a man, the warning is clear: beauty, charm, and desire are not enough. If her character is hollow, she will become the very danger Confucius feared most: the woman who destroys a man from the inside slowly until he no longer recognizes himself. The second lesson: do not mistake submission for loyalty. Many men today confuse compliance with devotion. They see a woman nodding in agreement and think she has surrendered her heart. But Confucius understood the human mask, the way people hide intentions behind words and gestures. He warned that a woman who bows to you in public may secretly despise you in private. A wife who flatters you may be sharpening a knife for your downfall. The true test of loyalty is not found in silence or obedience, but in the sacrifices made when no one is watching. If she respects you only when you are strong, but abandons you when you stumble, then she was never truly yours. The third lesson: a man without discipline is prey to every woman's ambition. Confucius built his philosophy on order. To him, a man ruled his household the way a king ruled his state, not with chaos, but with restraint. A man who cannot govern himself, his habits, his impulses, his speech, will soon be ruled by others. And in the private sphere, that ruler will often be a woman. If you drink too much, she will control you. If you waste your money, she will resent you. If you cannot command your time, she will command it for you. Discipline, Confucius insisted, was not just for soldiers and scholars. It was the very condition that preserved a man's sovereignty within his home. Without it, he becomes a servant, smiling while shackled. The fourth lesson: respect is not begged, it is embodied. Confucius despised men who chased validation. To him, dignity was the invisible armor of a noble man. Once lost, it could not be restored by pleading. Women, he argued, instinctively test men. They probe for weakness, for signs of fragility. And when they find it, they cannot unsee it. If you beg for love, you lose it. If you bend your integrity to keep her approval, you lose both approval and integrity. The only way to maintain respect is to live in such a way that losing you would be her greatest mistake. The fifth lesson: do not fear solitude, fear false companionship. Confucius was brutally honest about loneliness. He knew that many men fall into destructive unions because they cannot bear silence. They crave a warm body beside them, even if that body carries contempt in its heart. But he warned that a woman without virtue is not company, she is corruption. A man who clings to her out of fear will find his soul rotting slowly in her shadow. It is better to eat alone in peace than to feast in the company of betrayal. Solitude, he argued, is the furnace in which greatness is forged. False companionship is the poison that ensures greatness never arrives. The sixth lesson: the woman to fear most is the one who flatters your weakness. This is where Confucius revealed his most dangerous truth. Not every woman destroys by fighting a man. Some destroy him by feeding his illusions. She praises him for being good enough when he is wasting his potential. She comforts him in his laziness instead of challenging him to rise. She tells him he is strong when he is, in fact, fragile. These women do not appear dangerous. They look like allies, lovers, even wives. But they create men who are empty shells, men who never become what they could have been. For Confucius, this was the most terrifying betrayal of all. A woman who feeds your weakness is more dangerous than one who exposes it, because she kills your greatness without ever raising a blade. And finally, power is not taken by charm, it is preserved by virtue. Confucius believed that every relationship between man and woman was, at its core, a struggle for harmony. But harmony was impossible when one party abandoned virtue. If the man betrayed it, he became a tyrant. If the woman betrayed it, she became a seducer. The only way forward, he argued, was for the man to hold firm in his discipline, to embody strength, and to protect the moral axis of the household. Not through manipulation, not through deceit, but through a presence so steady that corruption could not take root. These lessons are not soft. They are not gentle. They sting because they expose the illusions that men live under today. Every command Confucius gave was meant to protect men from the woman who does not respect virtue, from the woman who flatters weakness, from the woman who destroys silently. These are not enemies outside the gates. They are enemies inside the home, inside the bed, inside the heart. The question is not whether such women exist. They always have. The question is whether you are the kind of man who sees them for what they are, or whether you are the kind of man who blinds himself until it is too late. Confucius left us with many teachings, but this one cuts the deepest because it does not flatter men, it exposes them. The woman every man should fear is not simply a romantic figure, not merely a lover or a wife, but a mirror of his own weakness. She is the woman who sees through him, who strips away the illusions he hides behind, who silently measures the gap between the man he pretends to be and the man he truly is. And here is the haunting truth: such women exist everywhere. They are not witches or demons, they are not enemies in disguise. They are simply awake. They cannot be deceived by shallow charm, empty bravado, or borrowed words. When a man stands before her, she sees the fractured lines in his character, the tremor in his voice, the hollowness of his ambition. And if he is not prepared, if he is not real, she will dismantle him without lifting a finger. This is why Confucius's warning is timeless. Men waste years fearing rejection, fearing abandonment, fearing betrayal. But they should fear something far greater: being revealed as weak when tested by the gaze of a woman who will not tolerate weakness. That is the trial by fire every man must face. So the question is not whether such a woman exists. She does. The question is whether you will meet her as a man or as a boy. If you are undisciplined, unfocused, addicted to comfort, then she will burn you down. But if you stand in the fullness of your strength, not as a tyrant, not as a brute, but as one who commands respect by his very presence, then you will not fear her. Because the truth is, such women are not your enemy. They are your greatest test, and if you survive them, they are also your greatest allies. Confucius knew this centuries ago. Power and virtue are not given, they are forged. A man who does not forge them will always be destroyed by the woman who demands them. A man who embraces them will find that what once terrified him now sharpens him. The woman you fear most is not there to ruin you. She is there to show you what you truly are. And so the choice is yours. Will you keep running from her, living small, hoping never to be exposed? Or will you face her head on, and in doing so, face yourself? Because if you do not, she will appear anyway, and when she does, it will be too late. Confucius's lesson is merciless, but it is also liberating. The woman every man should fear is the very one who forces him to rise.